If you like the sweet science, get ready to talk boxing on the Gloved Fist podcast with top boxing writers Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch. Frank, a former amateur boxer out of Philadelphia, writes for NY Fights and can be seen on the Boxing Channel. Jack, an amateur boxer who competed in the New York Golden Gloves, was a 6-term president of the Boxing Writers Association. And now, here's Frank Lotierzo and Jack Hirsch.
This is Northeast Streaming Sports.
And we're back. Welcome to Glove Fist. My name is Frank Lotierzo, former fighter, part-time writer, full-time observer, and I am joined by Jack Hirsch, former 6-term Boxing Writers Association of America president. Jack, how are you this evening?
Hey, I'm real good, Frank. So much news is happening in the world of boxing.
Jack, I have a better story than anything in boxing. Now, I know some of the people that we interact with and that watch this show or contact us. I also know they're football fans. And I predict this will be the worst year of my life following football because the perfect storm is brewing, Jack, and you're going to have to talk me off the ledge in probably early January, and that is Philadelphia Eagles, I think, have a great chance to win the Super Bowl, and even more of a shot than the Eagles, I think the Ohio State Buckeyes have an excellent chance to win the CFP in college football. I think everything's fallen in place. The Buckeyes have won 2 titles in 52 years. If not now, when?
Well, when all said and done, Alabama's probably going to win the national championship. But as far as football goes, let's get this out of the way. The Buffalo Bills are going to beat the Green Bay Packers in the Super Bowl. So our listeners take note. But now
you have the Packers going to the Super Bowl.
Knowledge, we're going to lose viewers here, Frank.
Jack, I know more about football than boxing.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding. It's pretty close. But I'll say this right now.
Yeah.
I may have been wrong about Spence and Crawford fighting this year and with each passing day, and we are going to get to that a little later in the show. But let me just say this. And Mac, I know you're listening, okay? No way the Green Bay Packers are going to the Super Bowl. No how, no way. If every other team drops out of the league, they still won't make it. Go ahead, Jack. Time's yours.
Okay. There's a lot of news in boxing, and we tend to talk a lot about negatives. Okay, but the boxing world did lose an icon who wasn't as appreciated in the United States as I guess he should have been. But I was always intrigued by the great former world bantamweight and featherweight champion Etta Joffrey. Now, I was fortunate enough to spend time with him 30 years ago when he was inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota.
Which would have made him about 56 years old, right?
I hung out with him and his son in his room. Such a vibrant, wonderful man. Not only a great fighter, but a great guy. I mean, I've interviewed a lot of people in my life. But sometimes you come away after spending time with someone and you say, this guy is an absolute pleasure. And he was a congressman in Brazil, too. And I saw that Pele recently posted something about Etta Joffrey.
Oh, wow. I didn't see that.
Right. But what intrigued me always about Etta Joffrey was this. Okay. Nat Fleischer would have his top 10 listings of all time in the various weight divisions. And Fleischer passed away in 1972. Fleischer was ridiculously, underline the word ridiculously, biased towards the old timers. Modern guys couldn't even get within sniffing distance of the top 10. For example, Sugar Ray Robinson went no higher than number 5, and this was 1972. Yep. Okay.
And Joe Louis, I think, was number 4, number 5 heavyweight.
Joe Louis was number 5 heavyweight. So enough said with that. But Etta Joffrey was number 4 on his all-time list. He rated Joffrey actually higher than any other guy who was active towards the end of Fleischer's life. I heard some rumors that he was put there by some other people in the Ring Magazine office, but I can't believe that because Joffrey was small potatoes compared to the big names you just mentioned, like a Joe Louis, like a Ray Robinson. If they wanted to make a buzz, they would have elevated one of those guys. And Fleischer, when he was alive, never said Joffrey wasn't his guy in the top 10. So that intrigued me. I mean, he was an absolute master boxer puncher, lost 2 fights in his career. What was he, 72, 2-4? And
with 50 knockouts.
Right. He lost the 2
Never
fights.
stopped.
Never stopped to fighting Harada. The first fight, he swore to me he won the fight. It was in Japan, Harada's home country. And he's saying everyone came up to him after, told him he won the fight. Fighters always say that.
Right.
But what's revealing too, he lost a rematch on a close decision, but Joffrey in private didn't complain about the decision. He accepted it, shrugged his shoulders, I lost, and he left it at that. So it makes it a little more credible what he said about the first fight. But a real icon, and a writer, Chris Smith, wrote a book on Eddie Joffrey recently. But I'll tell you, when I saw a picture of him, Frank, a couple of years ago, it startled me. You know, sometimes people age a certain way if you haven't seen him in a long time. And to see how much older Joffrey got, but listen, he lived till his mid-80s. So
and for a fighter that had that many fights, that says a lot. Jack, I went back and I watched some films of him that were available today because when he was fighting, it wasn't before my time where I couldn't see him. But as you said, he only fought in the U.S. 3 times, so there wasn't a lot that I could glean from him. But I've watched him over the years, and here's how I would break his style down. He was Salvador Sanchez, only aggressive. An aggressive Salvador Sanchez. He could counter, hook off, spin and hook, uppercut, jab, move. He could back up. He could go forward. He could do everything in the ring. And I think probably pound for pound, he might have even been a little bit of a better puncher. And Jack, that's why when I posted when he died, I said he was a chameleon. He was a water fighter. Bruce Lee had a great line about being a water fighter when he said that bit about if you put water in a teacup, it becomes a teacup. If you put it in a pail, it becomes the pail. In other words, he's saying that you can morph into whatever you need to be to tie the other guy in a knot. And when I watched Joffrey fight, that's what I see. He was a boxer puncher, as you said, but he was so fluid and smooth. He had the two-handed power, and he really had LaMotta toughness, side toughness, as we've read. He was the complete package, and it's just a shame that there's not more footage of him available on YouTube.
His name was pronounced 2 ways, Joffrey, Jaffa, so however we say it.
I've seen Joffrey too.
Yeah, right, different ways. But you mentioned Salvador Sanchez, okay? Great featherweight. But if I had to compare the 2 of them, I'd give a little edge to Joffrey, saying he's just a little better than the great Salvador Sanchez. If you want to have a debate as far as who is better than who, but that's arguable, okay? But
Jack, I really can't. I'm not going to argue with you on that. But I will just say this in defense of Sanchez: he got killed at 23. We may not have seen his best, so. Yeah. It's a little bit unfair there, but I just thought stylistically, and again, a guy in the ring, and Sanchez is the best of my lifetime, but watching Joffrey, he's close, where he's just so smooth and relaxed, and like no matter what changes in the ring, he can glide into, and he can adapt, and he can address it. And as I said, I think pound for pound, he was a slightly better two-handed puncher and a little bit more of an aggressor.
I want you to consider this, Frank. Joffrey had basically 2 careers the way Muhammad Ali did.
Right.
There was the first coming of Muhammad Ali. Then there was the enforced 3-year-plus layoff. Joffrey, after he lost his title to Harada, basically as a bantamweight, he was off like 3 years or so. And then he comes back and you'd think his skills had diminished. and he goes on this big winning streak to win the featherweight title, beating outstanding
He
fighters.
took 3 years off. That's a good point. Took 3 years off.
To take 3 years off and to still be that good, I mean, great.
And never stopped in all those fights. 78 fights total. I mean, that says a lot. And he had all of his wherewithal when he retired. And I understand he wasn't hurting for money either, and he lived a good life.
Exactly. And I met him, his son, and just great fighter, great man. Okay.
All right, Jack. We have paid homage to Eder Joffrey, however you say it, and it's a shame there's not more of him. To you younger guys out there watching, read about him. Try to educate yourself on him. You'll see he was special as the Leonards and the guys that we idolize today. Changing gears. There's a big fight this weekend, Jack. It's a rivalry fight. The son of Chris Eubank and Nigel Benn are fighting. That would be Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. Conor Benn is basically campaigned as a welterweight. Chris Eubank Jr. has been a middleweight. They're fighting at a catchweight fight, and there's a lot on the line. This is a very big fight in the UK. I don't know if I'm going to catch it, but I am very interested in it, and I will try to catch it.
Chris Eubank's been middleweight, around super middleweight as well. And people have to understand the backdrop to this, why it's being made. One of, by the way, we thank TJI Sports.
Yes, thank you.
People have to understand the origins of this rivalry. Their fathers, Chris Eubank Sr. and Nigel Benn Sr., they had a 2-fight rivalry, basically. Chris Eubank stopped Benn in the first fight. The second fight ended in a draw. Most people think Benn won the fight. It was similar to Leonard and Hearns, their scenario, 2 fights. And they were bitter enemies, and they stayed enemies into retirement. But then recently, the two of them went on tour together, the fathers, and they became friends. Nigel Benn,
which I think is so cool.
He hated Chris Eubank, and then he started liking him afterwards. I mean, their rivalry was so intense before they became friends. After they retired, they were on this superstar competition. And Nigel, different sports, different activities. Nigel,
I saw that.
A little bet of it, and he said, "Revenge is sweet." And Eubank's wife got mad. She said, "That's not revenge. You didn't beat him in the ring. You beat him in one of those." But now the sons, Chris Eubank Jr., called out Conor Benn. Now we have to understand that Chris Eubank Jr. is an established pro. He's been around, okay, a while. Conor Benn is a young fighter on the way up, getting better and better. He recently had a devastating knockout of Chris Algieri. And he has a lot of upside, but the X factor in this, Frank, is something you mention a lot that you hate, when a fighter goes down in weight. Now, this is so alarming to Chris Eubank Sr. He's begging his son to pull out of the fight. He's calling people up, reportedly, getting word out there that a tragedy could happen to his son. That's how concerned he is. He says you can't get down to—
I'm not buying that, Jack. I know that's what he's doing, but to me, I know that Eubank Sr. is doing that, but Jack, I'm calling a fugazi on that. I think he's just trying to hype the fight, trying to throw the Benn family off a little bit. I don't buy that, but here's what I did look up. Chris Eubank has to make 157 for this fight. He has never fought below 158 and a quarter. Conor Benn, in his last fight, he was 146 and a half. He's never been over 148 and a half. So I think based on that, I kind of think it favors Eubank. I mean, that last pound, those couple pounds could make a difference, and that scares me, but it's not quite, it's not 5 or 6 pounds. It's only like 2 less than he's weighed. I think it could be, what's that?
a guy who understands boxing history as well as you just has to look back at what the old timers did. Like an Emil Griffith, he gave up weight. Sugar Ray Robinson would give up weight. They didn't squeeze every pound out. Conor Benn will come in at 152, very strong, something like that. Strong. So big deal. He's giving up 5-6 pounds or whatever. It's not a
no, Jack. You missed my point. My point is how much will Eubank be compromised?
Well, that's
if Eubank is Jack. Catchweight fights always benefit someone. Okay, either it's a bridge too far, or either way, one guy comes down too much or moved up, like we saw with Mikey Garcia. I think that Ben could be at the disadvantage because he's going to come up in weight. We don't know what that's going to do to him. It may slow him down. Let's face it. Eubank is definitely the bigger guy. And even though Ben is undefeated, he has not faced the caliber of fighters that Eubank has. And he only lost to George Groves and Bully Joe Sanders.
Right. And they were legitimate losses, reasonably close decisions. I'm going to say point blank now. I'm going with Conor Benn to upset Chris Eubank because I think he's a hungrier fighter. I think he's a fighter who's ascending, going forward, getting better and better and better, and he has some momentum. As soon as Chris Eubank called out Conor Benn, I mean, first off, the shock had to wear off because he's a much bigger guy. So Conor Benn never would have thought of fighting Chris Eubank on his own, not now, maybe in the distant future. Conor Benn quickly accepted the fight. Conor Benn is what's known, Frank, as a blue chip prospect. You don't risk blue chip prospects in fights that you think there's a good chance that they can lose. You don't put them in there for the payday, for the event. You get them, like, for example, like your guy, Jaron Ennis, he's ready right now, but that's no argument. They could put him in with anyone now. But a year ago, they weren't going to risk throwing him in with a Terrence Crawford.
So you basically think that Ben is catching Eubank at the right time?
I think Chris Eubank Jr. is as good as he's ever going to be, and he might not be as good as he was. I think Conor Benn is getting better. And I look for him to carry the fight to Chris Eubank Jr., the bigger guy. I don't look for him to box and move side to side.
Well, from what I've seen of Ben, and it hasn't been as much as I like. That is how he fights. He fights like his father. He's an aggressor.
Right. But he was, when he started fighting Conor Benn in the beginning, we thought it was a novelty, Nigel Benn's son. He looked very ordinary. He looked like a project. But then he turned out to be a heck of a good fighter who's just getting better. But we'll see. It's Saturday night. To me, it's in England. No one has home court advantage.
Home court, right?
Right. So to me, this is an intriguing fight. I wish they'd have more fights like this on pay-per-view, not as a main event, like 3 fights of that caliber on pay-per-view. I mean, these are the fights I love to see. Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. Who are you picking, Frank?
You know what, Jack? I was just thinking, who makes for better matchups down the road? And there's a lot of opponents for both of them. I'm going to be honest. I haven't followed Conor Benn as closely as I have other fighters. I was never blown away by Eubank. I don't like guys going down. That does bother me, but it's not quite as far as he's been, although it was 2014 since he was at 158.
That was a long time ago, Frank.
Yes, it was.
What did he weigh? Do you have his weights in front of your recent fights? What's he weighed the last?
You talking about Eubank?
Eubank.
160, 164, 61 and a half. He was 59 in December 2019. 67 and a half. Wow, he was 68 in 2018.
167 and a half.
Well, you know what, Jack? You should have never made me look at those weights. You know that?
Why not?
because I was going to pick Eubank. I did not realize he had been up that high. I don't like coming down to that weight. That's 10 pounds, and he's 7 or 8 years older. I'm going to go with Ben too.
You're growing, and listen. We thought the same
thing.
I didn't think it at the time, but a lot of people. That's when Pacquiao fought De La Hoya. They assume, well, Oscar's the much bigger guy, Pacquiao's smaller. I think sometimes these weight advantages in the lower weight divisions are a little overrated.
Absolutely. Oscar looked like an empty package. He came at 145. Same thing with Ray Leonard when he fought Terry Norris. He hadn't made 154 in how long, and he comes down to that weight. You know, Jack, I was going to lean towards Eubank to make it a little bit more fun between us, but I hadn't realized how high he had been. And just in his second to last fight last year, October, less than a year ago, he was 164. I don't like that. And he's a guy that doesn't have much body fat on him. So I'm going to have to go with Ben too. And I think it'll be a decision. I'm a little bit pumped to see the fight, and we'll have something to talk about next week. But it's a shame you had me look up those numbers, Jack, because I was close to going against you.
I got to defend his dad, Chris Eubanks Sr. He was a long-time WBO middleweight champion. So he knows as well as anyone what it takes to make weight. And he's probably thinking, when I held the WBO middleweight title and I made all those defenses, and I had to make 160. I barely made 160. I couldn't get down to 157 without weakening myself terribly. So that's
it. People don't realize, Jack, how much that takes out of you getting there, and especially when you're older.
Frank,
there's no
case in point. He couldn't make 130 in front of his fans in Newark. He tried. He didn't want to give up his belts. He really didn't want to, not in front of his fans in Europe.
But I mean, he's really a lot younger and he's growing. So I could see that he couldn't make the weight. But yes, you know, look, guys grow in their mid-20s and they get bigger. And when you hit 30 and then you try to cut that weight down to where you were 8 years ago, I don't like that one bit. And it's like, that did scare me off of Eubank. So if I'm wrong and Eubank wins, I'll be mad I didn't pick him. But if Ben wins, I'm going to give you credit for making me check the weights, because that really set off a red light. All right, Jack, there's another fight. Speaking of weight, this guy's 6'6", and he makes 154, and that's Sebastian Fundora. How in the heck does he do that? He fights Carlos Ocampo this weekend, whose only loss was to Earl Spence. He was stopped in the first round, but he's on a win streak since then. And I think Ocampo is the opponent in this fight. And I think Fundora is going to win, and he's probably going to stop him.
What is Fundora? Like something like 6 feet 6 inches?
6'6".
In the middleweight. Yeah, I mean, so that's a bit of an.
They have him listed at 6'5.5" with an 80-inch reach.
You know what people tend to do, Frank? They tend to stereotype fighters. Because Fundora is 6'6", a junior middleweight, they're going to say he can't fight on the inside. But that's not true. He can
fight. He has vicious uppercuts.
Right. And he's physically tough. They see a thin guy. They don't realize some thin guys are very physically tough. A lot of them aren't, granted. But some guys are.
He looked tremendous in his last fight with Erickson Lubin, and there's a guy that should have had the advantage on the inside, and Fundora took him apart.
But there's different levels in boxing, Frank. It was great the way he beat Erickson Lubin, a quality fighter. Erickson Lubin is a fine fighter, good quality fighter. But if Jamel Charlo, who holds the junior middleweight belts, were in the ring against Fundora instead, we know Fundora doesn't get by Charlo. I mean, I don't give him a serious chance of beating Charlo. But listen, let's see how he does.
Let's see how he looks, Jack, because I think stylistically he can give Charlo some issues and problems. I would pick Charlo. I think Charlo is elite. I'm not sure if Fundora is, but I do think his style, his size, his toughness, and the fact that he can fight inside, I think that would give Charlo some issues. But I don't think Ocampo will be much of a match. And I think this will be the continuation of the come-out party for Sebastian Fundora. And that junior middleweight division could be fun if some of these welterweights move up.
Yeah, but he's a fan-friendly fighter, Fundora.
Yes, because he mixes it up.
Right. Good image.
And it's rare for a guy with that long arms to be able to fight inside. You think if I crowd him, I'm safe and I take his reach away. Erickson Lubin tried to do that, and he really got dismantled in the process, and he was like in a catch-22. Couldn't beat him outside, so he said, okay, I'll take some incoming to get inside where I might have the edge, and it didn't work out that way.
No, but Fundora, despite his height, you'd think he'd box on the outside, use his reach. But Fundora understands it's about timing, toughness, will.
And Fundora likes to fight, Jack. He likes to mix it up, too.
Yeah.
That plays a big part. All right, changing gears. There's so much to talk about. Let me catch my breath. Okay. Jack, it's been all over the news. Terrence Crawford and Earl Spence doesn't look so good. Apparently, they had pretty much an agreement in place. Crawford was willing to take the smaller piece of the pie, the purse, but he wanted transparency in the numbers. And apparently Team Heyman and Earl Spence had a problem with that. And I can't blame Crawford for walking away from that. He's got to make sure that they don't put it to him numbers wise, and it's not looking good.
Frank, I recall a while ago, okay, before these negotiations with Crawford and Spence even began, you didn't say it in so many words, but you were basically hinting I was a hater when it came to Errol Spence. What do you have against Errol Spence? Because I question his character, his mettle. I saw too much go on with Errol Spence to know he doesn't want to fight Terrence Crawford.
I've always felt that way too, Jack.
That doesn't mean he's never going to fight him. Sometimes you're trapped and you just got to fight the guy after a while. But Spence, from what I hear, is making things so difficult to the point where Crawford might just say, the hell with this guy. I'll fight someone for $1 million somewhere. I can't take this nonsense anymore. Because, this fight should have been made. It's logical. But the way I think Spence is thinking, and I don't know for sure that he's thinking this way, but the way I think Spence is thinking, this fight falls apart. I'm going to give up my title. I'm not fighting Jaron Ennis, he's thinking. I'm going to give up one of my belts. So now Jaron Ennis is going to win that vacant belt, whichever one that Spence gives up.
Well, he's his IBF mandatory.
He gets the IBF belt. And guess what? Ennis, who's all fighter, will be willing to go for the ultimate challenge, saying, I'll fight Crawford. Crawford will fight Ennis. Ennis will understand he's got to get a little less money than Crawford because despite holding a belt, Crawford's the established fighter. They probably go 60-40 in Crawford's favor, maybe even 55-45. Crawford might even go for that to get a unification fight. In the meantime, Errol Spence fights Keith Thurman. He talks big. He beats Keith Thurman, of course. And then he's going to say, I'm the best welterweight in the world. These guys don't want to fight me. He's buying more time, okay, Jack, by doing this. And then eventually he can cash in at the very end. In Ennis and Crawford, either one, even if they beat him there, he cashes in at the end. And like Mayweather and Pacquiao made more money at the end of the rainbow than they would have made had the fight been made earlier. I think he might be looking at it that way. The fight's always going to be there for me. I want you to take note of something, Frank. When Crawford in last November knocked out Sean Porter, Errol Spence was in the crowd. I don't recall him coming up to the ring. Do you?
He didn't, but he did say immediately that let's make the fight.
No. From his seat, he left the arena. The guy who really wants to make it gets in the ring. And
But he
Chowder
but he did start talking, Jack, after that he wanted to fight. But again, it's words. Now let me rebut what you just said. And when I say rebut, give you my take. I don't disagree with much you said, but here's my thinking. If Earl Spence doesn't fight Terrence Crawford and he gives up his belt not to fight Ennis, I think it is a colossal mistake. I said this earlier. I said it on Facebook. Earl Spence doesn't have good options like Smokin' Joe didn't back in 72 with Ali in the rematch. Earl Spence, if he does not fight Crawford or Ennis next, he's going to be considered a chicken and a ducker. And you can say, well, they used to say that about Mayweather, but here's the difference. Mayweather was an established superstar. Earl Spence is not. Earl Spence, if he was smart, he would fight Terrence Crawford. He will get him off of 1 year of inactivity, and Crawford's style doesn't bode well with inactivity, where Spence's style, it favors him. Spence is the same guy every time out. He just needs to be in shape. Crawford depends on timing and reflexes. He hasn't fought in a year. They're not there. Also, Crawford would be Spence's signature fight, his marquee fight. It would be for a ton of money. And if he lost to him, it wouldn't be such a bad thing.
It's a 2-fight deal they're proposing.
Right. He could recover from that. If he doesn't go with Spence, Jack, or Crawford, and he ducks Ennis, he's got a problem with people and the fans, because they're so tired of it. And as most people said all along, they thought he was the guy holding up the fight. Now we will know it. And what's going to happen is Crawford's going to fight Ortiz, and Spence or Ennis is going to take apart somebody for that vacant belt. And then we might see Crawford fight Ennis, because as you said earlier, he will. And that'll be a hell of a fight. And Spence could be the man left out in the cold. In closing, Earl Spence is making a colossal mistake by not fighting Terrence Crawford down the road. And it's a shame, but it looks like it's going to go that way.
Well, he's trying to exhaust his options. So Keith Thurman fights under the same promotional banners, Errol Spence. A while ago, Spence.
Jack, if he fights Thurman, who cares about that? Thurman got his ass kicked by Pacquiao.
Well, that was a close loss to Pacquiao. I wouldn't.
But he still got dropped by a guy that was a featherweight.
The point is, Keith Thurman has a personality. They can hype the fight. Maybe it does good business. And this way, and it's a very winnable fight for Spence. So
no, Spence would beat Thurman.
Right. He still has the Crawford fight. He thinks out there. He's buying some time. Listen, I'm getting we said we weren't going to talk about it, but I'll admit
it has been in the news. We have no choice to talk about it. But let's put this to bed on one thing, in one area. I said because of the emergence of Ennis, they would fight before the end of this year. You disagreed, and as of right now, as us putting it to bed until it's signed, you were right. I gave Spence more credit than I should have, but it looks like they're not going to fight, and I called that one wrong. Jack, you also mentioned when we were talking in the pregame about the noise that Joe Joyce has made.
Yes.
About fighting Anthony Joshua or getting in the mix with Tyson Fury. Give me your thoughts on that, then I'll give you mine.
Joe Joyce should shut up. Anthony Joshua does not want to fight in December. Joe Joyce says he's going to take Fury's spot. Fury never signed to fight Joshua. The only reason Joshua, after such an emotional loss to Usyk, is coming back so soon in December is because it's Tyson Fury. It's massive. He agreed to the terms. And Fury is so full of it, Frank.
Oh, absolutely.
Listen, Usyk's manager today, and he's a man of great honor, Igis Klimas. They're not just said, these aren't just words. He said Usyk will be ready to fight Fury in February. So
that puts Fury in a bind, Jack.
if you really want the big unification fight, it's only
That puts
2
him in a
months
bind.
later. You can wait 2 months. I mean, Usyk will go to the bargaining table right now. They'll negotiate a deal to fight in February. But no, Fury is all over the place. All over the place.
Jack, his act is getting tired. It really is. I think we both agree he's probably the best heavyweight in the world until somebody beats him. But his act is getting tired. And Anthony Joshua was smart in this way. He was coming off 2 losses to Usyk, taking the Fury fight. Let's just say he believes he can beat Fury, and he matches up with him. If he beats Fury, that sort of washes the stench of the 2 losses to Usyk. So I could see why Joshua would go for that. But we know Fury is not going to fight Joshua. He's not going to fight Joyce, and he's not going to fight Usyk. He's probably going to fight Derek Chisora. I'm glad Derek will get a payday. It's a fight nobody wants to see.
Fury fighting Derek Chisora, man, he's already beaten a while ago.
Twice. Right,
twice. But the thing.
All right, Jack. Go ahead.
Fury proposed a 60-40 split. Okay, a 60-40 split in his favor for Joshua. Joshua took it, but Josh was entitled to a 60-40 in his favor for the rematch if it's a 2-fight deal.
Right.
So they're trying to iron things out, but listen.
That's not going to happen, Jack.
But understand, Anthony Joshua would only fight Tyson Fury in December. He has no way he can be mentally up for Joe Joyce.
No, he has nothing to gain. Joyce has everything to gain.
Maybe Joe Joyce becomes a viable opponent in the spring, perhaps, but certainly not in December. So, I
will say this, Jack, though. Joe Joyce is a force, and he bodes for some interesting matchups. Yeah. Him and Usyk would be something to see. Him and Wilder would be fun. Him and Fury would be fun. Him and Joshua would be fun. So Joe Joyce is in the mix, and it'll be interesting to see who he fights next. But I can guarantee you this. Eddie Hearn and Joshua will not go near Joe Joyce unless Joyce has the title or they have no choice. So I don't think we're going to see that fight. But Fury is the man holding the cards right now. It's just a shame that he does so many things to turn you off, and we can't take a thing that he says serious anymore, even though I think he's an outstanding fighter.
Agreed.
All right, Jack, we had something else you said you wanted to touch on. There was some talk today about the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, I want to make something clear. I'm getting tired of all this stuff on social media. I don't comment the vast majority of the time, because you have a back and forth. The few people I respect as much as Russell Peltz in this business, he filled in for me in the show. I call Russell. I might call him after the show tonight even. I like to pick his brain. Knowledgeable guy, a fair guy. But I am getting sick and tired of the Boxing Writers Association of America being blamed for each thing. Today, there was an old-time fight manager / promoter, Jack Hurley, who I felt should have been on the ballot. I recommended him to be on the ballot, but he wasn't on the ballot. And I see that the BWAA is getting blamed for that. The BWAA has nothing to do with who gets on the ballot. Let me make that clear. So Russell and Vince, well, even if they get on the ballot, the BWA members don't know what they're doing. The truth of the matter is Russell isn't lying there. There are a lot of members there who I don't think should have a vote, okay? I don't think should have a vote. If they do have a vote, they should do an extra amount of research, call up a number of knowledgeable people, and compare notes. I mean, yours truly does that. I could safely say that I have more historical knowledge than 9 out of 10 voters who vote, okay? But I still pick the brains of boxing historians like my buddy Dar Majeski. I might call up Russell Peltz, just pick their brains on certain guys. And I don't take what they say at face value, because I've been given opinions by people who I highly respect that I disagree with, that I can't go there with. But I don't want to see the BWAA getting blamed for everything. And listen, the BWAA members shouldn't get a ballot if they're not capable enough to vote, okay? If they get a ballot, should they throw it in the garbage? You would hope a member wouldn't vote unless he understands who's who pretty
But
clearly.
Jack, that's the problem. They all get a ballot, and it doesn't take much
Not on
to
every
be a member.
category, Frank. Not on every category. Some only get the modern category, and they don't get the observers.
When I was a member, I got my ballot had every category.
Right. Well, you're knowledgeable enough to vote on every category, and the names you wouldn't know. You speak to very knowledgeable people like a Russell Peltz. You pick their brain. You're a responsible voter, so they feel comfortable sending you those ballots.
But Jack, you know what the problem is? Here's the problem. The people like Russell, and I don't mean people like Russell, I should say old school guys, and I kind of think I'm in the middle. Russell, and I've only spoke to him briefly on this topic before, but I've read things that he said, and there's other guys like that they think that too many modern guys make it because it bodes well for the Hall of Fame, because then you can invite the fighters in, and then he can mingle with the fans, and it's better for business. Where guys that are dead can't do them any good. And that's why I think the thought is that they shy more towards the more modern guys, the guys from the 70s and 80s, a little bit more so than guys in the 30s and 40s. And that's especially true, Jack, with a lot of good trainers too. And I think that's the issue that Russell has. And when he sees guys, and you and I have argued this, like Ingemar Johansson get in, and Boom Boom Mancini, and fighters of that ilk, I think that's what drives him crazy. And I can see his point as well. But how do you decipher who gets a vote? Can you call up somebody and say, look, you're not qualified to vote. Your opinion doesn't hold enough to vote for guys to be enshrined in the Ultimate Hall of Fame?
What they should do, in my opinion, the way to do it, I don't think, and this is a heavy-duty statement coming from a former president of the Boxing Writers Association of America, someone who's still heavily involved. I think what they should basically do, the Hall of Fame, is get 20 of your most knowledgeable historians. They come down for a weekend and they sit around a round table and they butt heads. What's the best name? Kind of like the way a jury does it, Frank. You're discussing pros and cons rather than just get
They have a skull session.
Exactly. I think that's the best way of doing it. This way, I could convince you of something. You could convince me. Like you just mentioned names like Ingemar Johansson. I feel Ingemar Johansson is a Hall of Famer, right, because it's Hall of Fame. And he won the Hickok Award as the Athlete of the Year one year in all sports. And in his part of the country, Sweden, he's an absolute icon, and it's called International Boxing Hall of Fame. Some people felt Barry McGuigan doesn't belong in, but in Ireland, he was the biggest of icons in his part of the world. We look at things from an American perspective sometimes. Boom Boom Mancini. I'm not the biggest fan of Boom Boom Mancini. He cherry-picked throughout his career for the most part.
But he was the second most popular fighter in the 80s after Ray Leonard.
There you go, Arturo Gatti. He's not a Hall of Fame caliber fighter, but he's on the short list of perhaps the most exciting fighters of all time. And what did he mean for boxing in Atlantic City and HBO?
You could make that case.
Right, so we can make cases.
But yeah. Jack, you and I look at it differently. You look at, as you just said, you made a good case for Johansson. I am more meat and potatoes. Was the guy a Hall of Fame fighter? When somebody says to me, Ingemar Johansson, do I picture Hall of Fame fighter? No. When they say Deontay Wilder, do I image a Hall of Fame fighter? No. And I put more weight on that, and I think some of the old school guys go that way too. I can't kill them for that. My issue with the BWAA, and this was before I knew you, Jack, I wrote some really insightful articles over the years. And do you know how I know they were insightful? Because guys that write for Ring Magazine called me up and told me that Not that I need their validation, but they want to know, could they say what I said, and they would quote me and give me the credit for that. Jack, they seldom did it. That's why I kind of, and I'm an observer in the background. I don't go to as many fights as I used to at one time, like in the 90s, because my impression is it's kind of a club. And as far as the awards go, it's the same guys over and over. And I read stories that win, and I think, I never got a mention. Now, our friend Bernard Fernandez, for a decade, the past decade, has tried to persuade me to join again, and I haven't done it to now. But I can see some of the issues that the Russell Peltzes and others have. But, that's just me, and that's why I didn't want to vote in it, and that's why I haven't voted since, I think, 2008, 2009.
Well, it's cliquish as far as the membership committee goes, but the membership committee is the equivalent of Congress or the Senate trying to pass a law. And when I was president, I was conflicted greatly, with the membership committee. On one end, they would be very snobbish, I thought some people who should have been members, weren't given membership.
Exactly.
Membership. But then on the other end, if I did away with the membership committee completely, it would have disenfranchised the organization, because they had some very big names on that committee. So you don't want to get that turmoil. And the second thing, too, you also had certain writers, and I use that word loosely with them, who really couldn't write. They were awful. And they applied for membership. I would have then had to deal with them as president and reject them. So having the membership committee was a shield. I have nothing to do with it. The membership committee judges you, and case closed. But
Jack, what the problem is? A lot of guys, and you know them and I know them, they want to see their name on a byline. They want to get passes to go to the fights, and they want to hobnob with the fighters. And that's what they want to do. They want to tell their friends, I'm a boxing writer. I hung out with Roy Jones at the dinner last night, and that gives them their cool kids card. And they really, like you said, they don't do the research. They don't know a whole lot about it. And sometimes too many of those guys get in at the expense of some guys that are authentic and should get in.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, they're pretty strict with who gets in.
It's more strict than it was.
Yeah, fanboys aren't getting in. They have a hard time getting in. I mean, they have to show they have a certain quality of writing about them. If the quality of their writing is really poor, they're going to have a hard time. But I could tell you they've made certain mistakes. And, and the guys on the committee, I mean, on balance, I haven't been a fan, I'll be honest. And this is a heavy-duty statement to go public with that, of the way they've done things. But I also feel that they do take their job seriously. And I also think they intend to be fair, okay? I think they do make the effort to be fair, but I disagree more with their judgment. I don't feel it's biased. We had one writer who was rejected, and he was very bitter and went off on them. And I said, look, I think the membership committee, point blank, made a mistake when it came to you, but it wasn't because there was any bias there. It's just, it was like watching a boxing match and just turning in a poor decision, the cards, when there's no bias, like what fight were you watching?
I understand that, Jack. Well, it is a controversial subject, and as far as the voting, everybody has their opinions. We all believe in our opinions. I can name some fighters who I think it's a crime that they're not in. We'll do that on another show. I'm glad we addressed it. Now let's have some fun. What we like to do at the end of the show is go over some hypothetical fights. Jack, the list I have in front of us, we haven't had a better one to date. So I'm just going to, let's just see how many we can get to and have some fun. Number 1, Aaron Pryor versus Julio Cesar Chavez at 140. Go.
The Pryor who fought Alexis Arguello in the first fight, that's the Aaron Pryor that I'm using at junior welterweight against Chavez at junior welterweight. I think Aaron Pryor is a slightly better version of Meldrick Taylor. Okay. And when when Pryor stopped Arguello, it was a 15-round fight. He stopped him in the 14th in the first fight. And Chavez got to Taylor round 12. If we're talking about a 12-round fight, I think Pryor gets it done. I think punches are coming in bunches. Chavez has a hard time getting set. No, Pryor doesn't knock out Chavez. He doesn't stop him. Chavez is competitive, has some good moments, but I think Pryor's energy level, his quickness, the abundance of blows are such that he outpoints Chavez.
Okay, we agree. I think the Meldrick Taylor, I was going to use that. Taylor puts his punches together. He's quick, but Pryor just as fast, more awkward, bigger puncher, more durable and stronger. So Chavez is he's not going to dent Pryor either. So I think Pryor wins that fight by decision. If it's 12 rounds, if it's 15, I wouldn't rule out a late stoppage. Okay. Number 2.
For Chavez, if it's 15 rounds, I think it's a better opportunity for Chavez. I
think he would have taken too many punches, Jack. I don't think he would have came back on that. All right, number 2. And boy, I hate this one because it's so hard. But I have a feeling that you're not going to think it's hard. Rocky Marciano versus Evander Holyfield, heavyweights.
Man, oh man, oh man. I mean,
told you. I'll go first.
You go ahead.
All right. Jack, I hate saying this. This really hurts because they're both two of my favorites. But Holyfield stood in there, prime Holyfield, with so many big, strong guys, and they didn't get him out. They couldn't finish him. They couldn't knock him out. They couldn't stop him. They couldn't keep him from coming at them. Holyfield can box. Let's just say he's Ezra Charles with 15 or 20 pounds and a little more power and more durability. I don't think anybody, with the possible exception of prime George Foreman, 73, 74, would go through Rocky Marciano. But I'm going to say this, Jack. I hate to say it. It hurts me to say it. I don't want to say it. But I would have to give the edge to Holyfield because of his height. He can box. Rocky can only go forward. And I don't think Rocky can beat him up any more than Tyson tried to do. I would give the edge to Holyfield.
Yeah, I mean, you want to consider what Marciano weighed, around 187, right?
Right. But he came down, Jack. He could have fought at 200, 205. He was a fitness nut.
Yeah, but he didn't. I mean, he didn't have to make weight, yet he weighed 187, 188 for his fights, Marciano.
Because, Jack, he felt he had more stamina, but Al Weil actually liked him. I'm sorry, Charlie Goldman actually liked him a little higher because he thought he actually had better stamina, was stronger. But Rocky, the lower he was, the better he felt mentally. Which is big.
Yeah, I would. I mean, wow. I mean, it's a tough fight. I get the feeling it would end inconclusively. Marciano tended to cut, and Holyfield would hit him a lot in the early rounds.
They would trade. It would come down to chins, too.
Well, if it came down to chins, I'd give a little edge to Marciano, actually. I think his chin was a little better than Holyfield's. But Marciano did cut. I got to believe that Holyfield would cut him up. And I could see the fight being stopped in the 9th round where Rocky complaining, well, I was coming on, but Holyfield would be ahead on points. Maybe one of these technical decisions in 9 rounds. Holyfield would be up 6 rounds to 2, but Rocky would have won the 8th round and his fans would have said, oh, The Rock was just getting warmed up. But I would have to go with Holyfield. I mean, endless stamina. The Holyfield that fought Kari, even though it was a cruiserweight fight, Kawhi fought in a style similar to what Marciano would have. He would have came at Holyfield the same way, and Holyfield went through 15 rounds of hell.
But that was 190-pound Holyfield. That wasn't the best Holyfield at heavyweight, but I got you.
That's what I'm saying, but he could have duplicated that at heavyweight if he had to. And George Foreman had these physical advantages over Holyfield in their fight. Just a bigger guy coming at Evander, and Evander held him off for the whole fight.
See, Holyfield, based on his opposition, you can make a case for Holyfield, and I know it hurts us both to pick him.
But I go for Holyfield maybe on cuts late in the fight. But if we're Rocky, very competitive, and maybe feeling he was cheated out of the additional rounds, that could have made it different.
Jack, if you think that was tough, try this one.
That one was tough.
At light heavyweight, Archie Moore versus Dwight Cowie.
Yeah, I'd go with Archie Moore in that fight. I mean, Archie Moore fought all type of fights. Archie Moore got stopped a few times. His chin certainly wasn't foul-proof. But Cowie was a good, solid puncher, but he wasn't an explosive puncher. I don't think for one punch he hit harder than his contemporaries like Matthew Saad, Muhammad, and Marvin Johnson. I think they actually hit harder for one punch than Cowie. That's just my opinion. I think Archie is cagey enough. There'd be a lot of infighting. He would get it done. He would win a reasonably close decision. I go with Archie.
Okay.
Moore.
That's fair. I hate to say this. I like Archie Moore for the fact that I think Dwight would bring the fight to him. I think Archie would get his shots. I also think Dwight would do some good work inside, but I think Archie could box enough and he hits just hard enough where I don't think Dwight could take his liberties with him. I think it would be a great fight. I don't know if Archie Moore would beat him every time out of 3, but I would give the edge to Archie Moore by a decision. And a lot of that has to do is because Dwight can only fight one way. Moore hung in with Rocky for 9 rounds. Dwight isn't quite Rocky, and I think Moore would make it to the finish line and win a decision. Okay. So we agree.
I think Rocky would stop Cowie before 9 rounds.
But that would be a different style fight. Yeah, yes, right, that would be a different fight. I agree with that. All right, here's another one that I go back and forth on because I have them in my top 5 or 6 all-time greats at the weight. Emil Griffith versus Thomas Hearns.
You know, Angelo Dundee was asked that, and he said Emil Griffith would have beaten Tommy Hearns. Okay, before he passed. And he said his own guy, Louis Rodriguez, would have beaten Hearns, too. You know, I discussed that.
He also said Jimmy Ellis would beat Joe Frazier.
No, but that was his fight. He had nothing to gain with a Griffith-Hearns fight. But Griffith-Hearns, that's not his fight at Griffith. He used to talk Dundee what a great welterweight Griffith was. I think styles make fights. I think no way Hearns knocks Griffith out. Forget about that. It's not happening. And I'm talking about the Hearns that took out Pepino Cuevas. Doesn't knock out Emil Griffith. But I think Hearns' plan B works. Hearns was a masterful boxer. He could move. He's so hard to outbox. I think Griffith has Hearns moving around the ring. Hearns is jabbing, boxing, holding a lot, believe it or not, getting off some big punches now and then. Griffith comes on. Hearns wins a reasonably close decision.
So it looks like the last 7 or 8 rounds of the Leonard fight until Leonard tracked him down.
I think Griffith comes on as the fight goes along. Griffith comes on the stronger of the 2 guys. And by the time the fight ends, Griffith is the better fighter at the end of the fight, but Hearns puts rounds in the bank early and gets a legitimate decision, you know, but Griffith would be coming on strong before it was over.
All right, Jack, I don't have much time, but I'm going to say this. I kind of see it the same way. Hearns was really never outboxed by anybody. Griffith has a concrete chin. He will carry the fight. Hearns will hit him. I think Hearns can keep him from being too bold. Griffith's physical strength and aggression does scare me a little bit, but I think Hearns, after 5 or 6 rounds, realizes he has to box, gets on his bike, uses his jab. But I agree, at the end of the fight, Griffith might be coming on, but I think Hearns wins a split decision. So give the edge to Hearns.
Okay, great fight. You know, that's one of the fights I'd love to see. But I think we've basically, the final bell rang, and just the way Griffith and Hearns would have gone the distance, that's it with us too. So,
all right, Jack. Thank you for watching, everybody. We will see you next week. Be safe.